Good morning, everyone. Welcome to episode 27 of the Blowback Roundtable. We are fortunate, we're very fortunate to have two esteemed filmmakers with us today. Andrei Nekrasov is with us via audio from, I believe he's in Norway now. Is that right,
Yes,
Andrei?
yes. I'm in Stavanger. Hello. Yes, in Norway.
And Regis is with us from his home in Crimea. So thank you guys very much for joining us. Andrei, I did want to focus on your documentary that you put out in 2016 about the Magnitsky Act.
Yeah,
Us in America, we're familiar with the Magnitsky Act because that's a law that was passed to sanction Russia. And you had a really good documentary, kind of exposing what all that was about. And so I know I just watched it recently. Ben watched it recently. Carlo watched it recently, and it was a great film. We understand that you're onto that was a while ago, and you're onto many other projects. You're probably working on a film right now. Is that correct?
that's true. Yes, that's correct. Yes. Actually, more than one film, and I also write. So, uh, I'm sure you know enough about filmmaking to know that it's a process. You write a script. Even in documentary, you have to develop your ideas and. I also do basically. I have two projects, and one of them is an investigative one. And an investigation, you need to investigate also as you prepare. And in the Magnitsky, by the way, in the Magnitsky Act, it didn't start as an investigation. It started as a drama documentary. I thought actually everything was clear about the case, and then it turned into investigation in an investigation when I realized that things just didn't add up. And so with the projects I'm doing now, you have they're on fairly complex issues, international uh, stories which I have to investigate and to be, you know, certain that my version of events is true, because we live in this as post-truth world, and things are extremely complex, and sometimes basically lies. The official many official versions are not true. So you have to kind of investigate. Yeah.
Exactly, Andre. So we titled our program "Weaponized Narratives" because
Yeah.
that seems kind of the approach that's been really fine tuned by the West. Like they seem really good at putting out these narratives that aren't necessarily true, but they definitely further the interests of political interests and things like that. I don't want to ruin, any surprises that you have for the current film. It sounds interesting. We can talk about that if you would like, but if you're
Yeah.
not to the point where you're ready to discuss that, we could definitely. We have some questions about your thoughts and perspective on the geopolitical events that are just taking place right now.
Yeah, thank you. Yes, yeah, absolutely. I think we can meet up again a bit later when I'm a bit further into the projects I'm doing now, and we can talk again. But yeah, let's look back a bit. Yeah,
Okay, given your past work, that your current project does sound very enticing. So I definitely would
thank
like to
you.
discuss that at some point. So it was very interesting. You went into the documentary, working with Mr. Bill Browder and really trying to get Bill Browder's side of the story out about the
Mhm.
corruption and
Yeah.
and and evilness really of the Russian government. And
Yeah.
then by the end of the film, you kind of came to the realization that things weren't as they seem. And I encourage everybody watching to check out that film, and so you'll have a better idea of exactly what I'm talking about. But it is an awesome film. Can you want to just talk in your own words about
Mm.
the maybe the transformation that you
Mm.
that
Mhm.
you
Yeah, yeah,
underwent. Yeah.
yeah. Well, I mean, very, very briefly, my background is, basically in the arts. And by the way, not only documentaries, but also feature films and theatre, and I also write, and I've just recently published a novel. But from about the early noughties, early 2000s, I've I became very political because I essentially belong to this uh, class, a group of Russian intelligentsia, which is sort of traditionally and historically liberal. So that's my background, and we kind of look at any sign or trace of sort of less than 100% liberal with suspicion. At least I used to. Um, you know, and in this that particular and before, I'd made many films, but one of the more well-known one before the Magnitsky Act was a film about Alexander Litvinenko, who was poisoned in London, and it was a very successful one. It was premiered in Cannes. I now realize that it was given a lot of publicity, and Cannes, a main program of Cannes Film Festival, but it was, I hope, not only because I was also praised by for my filmmaking, film language, and I'm very proud of that film on that front. But of course, it did sort of follow the line, the mainstream line of the sort of Western kind of politics, and I still stand by my conclusions, uh, but that film wasn't really an investigation. It was kind of because I happened to know Alexander Litvinenko personally, and I was there at the hospital in London while he was dying. It was a really very shocking, traumatic experience for me, let alone for the poor Alexander, who died. He was dying slowly, with this very painful death. So that colored this personal relationship, of course, colored my whole position. Of course, it's a very complex story, and where not everything is clear, even now. But we'll have to spend a lot of time if we talk about all of my films. So, but it was still important to mention that Litvinenko film, because for me, Sergei Magnitsky, who is the hero of the film Magnitsky Act, was a little bit like Litvinenko, a sort of a courageous individual, a bit of a loner. By the way, Litvinenko was quite lonely, when he wasn't really known before he died. So I thought Magnitsky was another Litvinenko, but in a way even more interesting, because Magnitsky was coming from this financial world. He was an accountant. Mr. Browder calls him
not a lawyer.
Lawyer, which is not true. He was an accountant, but a very professional and hardworking accountant, but not at all a politician, not an opposition sort of activist. And so the story I believed in, that when at a sort of when an existential choice, sort of so to speak, came, he chose the right thing, coming from the world of of financial sharks and serving them. He was an accountant for big investors. When a moral choice he came up against this moral choice, he essentially sacrificed his life. And that, I thought, was a very powerful story, except it turned out to be not true. I mean, he very sadly died, but he certainly he wasn't the hero who, according to Browder, and as you rightly said, the version I believed in. So according to Browder, he was a whistleblower, hero whistleblower who accused the Russian police, the Russian state, of crimes and paid with his life for this. That's a fiction. That's a story invented by Mr. Browder. Magnitsky was a witness in a financial fraud case, which actually also involved Browder. That's why Browder had a motive to portray it as something else, as a story of heroism and human rights. It was in fact a financial crime, and Magnitsky was summoned as a witness, then arrested because he aided and abetted, according to the Russian investigation, which, by the way, was confirmed by the European Court of Human Rights. So I was vindicated in that investigation of mine. So Magnitsky was arrested and sadly died. And it may well be true that he was, he wasn't treated properly in prison. A Russian prison or any prison, for that matter. Most prisons, not any prison. By the way, in Norway, prisons seem to be quite good. This famous mass murderer Breivik apparently lives in a very good prison. So, okay, granted, Magnitsky wasn't in this comfortable sort of Scandinavian prison, but he was certainly not murdered, as Browder claims, for some heroic whistleblower. That's basically the gist of that.
Yeah, that's the official story. I'm Ben from Hungary. I just recently, like today, watched your movie, and what struck me is the first hour is like a very different movie from the second hour. In the middle, you say, well, I have to become a detective or an investigator, and a lot of the things didn't make sense. And I can feel, I don't want to put words in your mouth, like a certain fear, maybe just apprehension of shit. I have to remain human and go down this path. And you said in the noughties, the 2000s, you were one of the Russian expat liberals, the Navalny crowd, those people. I wonder in the 2020s, how has it evolved through this process? Not just the movie, but where are you today?
Well, I mean, I must say, I'm very clear about the reasons why I was sort of on the opposition side. I'm even clearer now, even though I have some issues with that group now. But I'm much clearer now, logically speaking, than I was then. And generally, I mentioned this sort of group of people called the Russian intelligentsia. Often it's emotions and sometimes understandable emotions sort of trump certain logic, and dialectics. The world is contradictory. It has to, I understand it now better than I used to. So the reasons why I was sort of and active, by the way, I was one of the leaders of one of the organizations of the opposition in St. Petersburg. It was, as I see it now, what Russians claim to be, Russian intelligence and the West mainly, claims to be, the way they describe Russia as a sort of colonial power, or almost sort of an imperialist power, which sort of bullies its neighbors and even threatens sort of the West geopolitically. So my view on that is much more complex now. But at the beginning of the years 2000, Russia was conducting an operation in Chechnya. Yes. And I met Chechens, and I met others, and I went there, and I did see. For me, that was a bit of a, or not even a bit of a sort of colonialist sort of operation, and that colonialism of any kind, I'm very against, basically, essentially. Even though, and but two caveats to that. By the way, the West uh, I remember making films about Chechnya, and them being sort of cancelled. I'd bring them to some film festival. They'll be to the West. I remember a couple of screenings, one in Berlin, where I was literally in the year was 2003, 2004, that sort of thing, and I was and one commission editor in London said, no, Andrei, it's too much. It's too much. Basically, I was, for the West, I was too critical of Russia. Those were completely different times. Russia was almost an ally. People have forgotten that. Despite the operation in Chechnya, people didn't care. The mainstream people, neither in the governments of Western governments or the media, they didn't care. Even the famous Russian opposition people, like people who I was friendly with, like Boris Nemtsov, who was later killed in Moscow, he wasn't at all a fan of. He was very skeptical about my activities, about Anna Politkovsky, if you remember, who was a friend of mine. She was also. People did. I remember empty rooms. Anna Politkovskaya, supposedly, presumably famous. She was speaking in front of 2 or 3 people in Berlin, or in the West. We've forgotten that. So these impulses, I'd say, say idealist impulses of those Russians who felt for the Chechens, who were not happy about their country of attacking Chechnya, even though most countries would do that, considering separatist, because that's how Russia treated Chechens, separatists, and most countries would try and prevent some territory from going away. So, but that was that's the reason why I essentially was in the opposition. You're absolutely right to say that in many ways the Magnitsky case was an influence which changed me in many ways, because if you look at it technically, it's a story of financial crime. Yes, a lot of money was stolen. A quarter of $250 million. But these things happen. The reason why it's absolutely crucial as a story, it's because it's sort of it reflects the whole post-Soviet, post-communist post-communist developments, and a one-sided Western take on that. You have this guy who, by the way, wasn't rich at all, as he confesses, Bill Browder, at all. He was of someone very modest means before he went into Eastern Europe, and especially into Russia, and basically profited from the Russian post-communist privatization. But a lot of people did that, and okay, well, some people were lucky, even though the whole thing it was, I'd say, criminal. The way the Russians were, the ordinary Russians were deprived of their collective sort of property, of the prospects they were promised. They worked for the equivalent of $100 a month, creating this vast, creating real value. But they did it because they were promised. They and their children and their grandchildren were promised this bright future, and they were, most of them were, honestly doing their job and believing in that promise and in that ideology, which was essentially, about brotherhood and justice. Let's face it. So, and then it turned out to be a lie, and they were basically robbed.
Putin.
overnight. So okay, but that's and some people were lucky, but some of those who got rich. Both Russia, by the way, of course, we have all those oligarchs, but also the Western people. And Browder is that side of the story which is not, we all know about oligarchs, but we don't know about all the Browders of this world, of the Westerners who went there and made money. But the problem is, it wasn't just lucky. If he'd been just lucky or cynical, okay, well, that's life in a way. But there was a crime. There was it started with a huge tax evasion, of millions. And he did that. And I mentioned the European Court of Human Rights because it effectively confirmed the Russian version of that case. In the 2004, the police opened an investigation into his taxes in this tiny republic, very poor, one of the poorest of areas of Russia. By the way, bordering on Chechnya. It's when the Russian army conducted this operation in Chechnya, and when I was making a film about human rights in Chechnya, Browder, who's now praising himself as this human rights. He's one of the biggest human rights defenders in the world. He didn't say a word about the Russian operation, was making money and evading tax, and that on the border of Chechnya. That's very symbolic. And he was moreover, he was known as Putin's fan. I actually heard of him for the first time when I was in the opposition, and he was praising Putin. And he had this reputation. Oh, that American who sort of is in love with Putin and praising Putin, and sort of because he wanted people to invest in his hedge fund, which was based in Russia, and he'd do anything for money, essentially. So anyway, that's the background of it. But that case was real; it was a real financial crime, and then it led to more suspicious or criminal activities. And then there was this Magnitsky case when, as I mentioned, almost $250 million disappeared. And they technically disappeared, if you watch my film, from the three companies which Browder had controlled. So he basically then smokescreened the whole thing by saying that, oh, those companies, yes, they were my companies or our companies, Hermitage Funds companies, but they were stolen. An interesting concept. Somebody, because you had to explain how come that money, that stolen money, that $230 million, which came to the bank accounts of those companies, and they did. How come it wasn't him, Browder, who basically nicked them, stole the money? So he said, no, the companies had been. I lost control of those companies, and that's where I started to suspect him, because this money, the company theft, he called it company theft, the way those companies were stolen by some, some sort of figurehead directors, it didn't make sense. It just didn't make sense. There were all kinds of inconsistencies, but to be more specific, you have to watch my film. Otherwise, we'll spend.
Can I add? You just have to read Russian in Cyrillic, which you did, which the West relies not on. They mistranslate, they misconstrue. All you have to do is read the original Russian documents.
Sorry. Yes, absolutely. Thank you. But sorry, I forgot going to the details. I forgot the sort of the upshot about which you asked me, and the upshot is that this. So, one thing is to say, okay, some people are lucky, some people, and of course, the Westerners had an advantage. If you went to Russia in the 90s, people didn't know, people hadn't had, a Western banking system. Everything was basically created at nihilo, from scratch, and anybody who understood the stock market or whatever had a huge advantage, because Russian stock market, okay, there was the crash in the 90s, but essentially if you just were in the know and bought some shares, I don't know, Gazprom or Norilsk Nickel, and did nothing, even during the crash, just did nothing, you'd automatically become a millionaire. But you had to know, first of all, had to have money, and then you had to have the experience. So you have this Russian people had no idea, and very few had any money to invest. So that was absolutely immoral. But so my point is that, but not only was it immoral, but if you then stole taxes from the poorest of those republics, and paid people, you had to also had to. It wasn't just a tax evasion; it was a fraud, because he put people. There were all kind of tax, loopholes and laws which allowed, for example, if you employ a handicapped person, you get a tax reduction. There were a whole list of the ways you could pay less tax, and he did everything. But he employed people who were also mentally handicapped as financial analysts, for example, and paying them pittance, and essentially stealing money from. As I keep repeating it, one thing is to be lucky, but the other thing, being lucky plus stealing money, and so that is a story. It's like it's not just any story. It's a story which encapsulates the whole injustice of what happened after the Soviet Union collapsed, and which essentially, in my view, also led to this war. Partly, of course, every historical events of that proportion. No one has a monopoly on explanations. With great respect, even Marx. Okay, I think it's a very important theory, but we this day and age, if we're left wing, there's no. I think we're into this sort of the theoretical. As far as I'm concerned, because I also read philosophy in college, etc. My position is that we're in the sort of in this post-Marxist world, where, like in physics, this is like the theory of uncertainty. I think should be applied with caution, of course, because we also have to believe in something. Yeah. So, but and there are a lot of explanations. What I mean is there are a lot of explanations for wars and this process and that, but we have to be allowed to put a hypothesis, and like I just did, that the injustices committed in the post-Soviet world also led to the war, not just some sort of evil president, or because people explain sometimes in the West, it also explained sometimes even with Putin's personal sort of character and psychology, which I call pseudo psychology. If you explain apropos explanations, if you explain everything with some person's psychology, you're basically a failed, you're pseudo intellectual. It's rubbish, because of course psychology plays a role, but not everything. It's just a way to avoid looking into the dialectics and the real reasons behind these.
It makes a good narrative.
Tragic events. Of course, it's a tragedy. Yeah, but yeah.
It's what the U.S. people are used to. We see it in Hollywood. These narratives about personalities, and there's evil people and there's good people, and Putin's an evil person and we're the good people. You're being far too modest with yourself. You didn't just study philosophy, right? You have a doctorate in philosophy.
Yeah, but yes, but I did. I studied under very. I still caught in the mid 80s. I still, there was very important period in French philosophy. I already missed Foucault, which was also a philosopher and psychologist, but just that school of Derrida and Michel Foucault and others. I just caught a glimpse of it on their way out, but I was lucky to study under some of the disciples of those famous philosophers like Henri Mechanique, and yes, so that also I studied philosophy and got a doctorate in the University of Paris. Yeah, but life, I just thought then I suppose I'm too emotional, too active, too kind of impulsive for an academic career. Even though I do write, and I'm writing a book which is rather philosophical at the moment. So, but the only reason why I go on about these things is the complexity of this world, and we can't know everything. And as you rightly said, I believe Browder because I simply I was actually prejudiced. I was prejudiced against the Russian state, and and by the way, I'm still a critic of the Russian government. To be clear. But sometimes the Russian opposition, the Russian liberal intelligentsia, to which I kind of historically belong, that's an interesting difference between a critic of a government in the West and the Russian sort of liberal critic. They, or even I at the time, they question even the very existence of their state. They're ready tomorrow. They're ready to basically to give up in some sort of conflict, to surrender to a foreign power. If they believe in say liberalism, they can go as far as to say, common rule. America, common rule here because you know better. How to run a democracy. So this is and Dostoevsky in the 19th century, he already sort of saw that the Russian pro-Western liberal is the most pro-Western liberal, is more pro-Western than the Western liberals. This is in sort of an extreme. But that creates a conflict in Russia because those people, and they of course are a minority, the liberals, they are in conflict with the majority of their own people, and God forbid, but it can also lead to a civil war in some circumstances, in which the liberals will be on the side of the West, and it could be a sort of, in theory, could be a proxy war within Russia. God forbid. But these are basically these are all the problems. I'm as a Russian, I'm of course very, very, very concerned with, and hence yes, the Magnitsky case was a turning point, but sometimes you also a film is not enough, as you've just heard. This
and it must be said.
Yeah.
It must be said. I'm Carlo Parcelli. I'm in Washington, D.C.
Yeah.
I'm in the belly of the beast. It must be said that liberal point of view that you're talking about from Russia and other countries, especially in Eastern Europe, is so far wrong. It is just, it doesn't understand American political and economic culture at all. If you want, you can take the quote from the poet Ezra Pound, of all people, when he was incarcerated at St. Elizabeth's. He said in one of his cantos, in a regime of grand larceny, petty larceny ranks as conformity. We have Wall Street created the 2008 world banking crisis. And they did it to steal money, and they stole not billions but trillions of dollars. And they've been promoted, and they have positions of power. No one has been No one has been convicted. So that notion that the West could come in, especially the United States, which is a rank evil place, could possibly inform somehow Russia is just, it's so naive. I can hardly believe it.
Yeah. But
when I was in Moscow, I experienced some of that liberal attitude among people, and I was there at the behest of a lawyer that was doing contracts between U.S. corporations and Russian oligarchs, people who had some means, and they were all corrupt. It was just wall to wall corruption. They were learning from the Americans how to be corrupt. It was a learning experience for them. Wow, you can steal this way, you can steal that way, you can steal that way. Wow, had no idea you could steal so many different ways, and still keep the population under your thumb because you have a public relations back system right out of Edward Bernays that can keep people naive and stupid and victimized like Americans are. The average American is the biggest victim in the world.
Yeah.
He's been given like a modicum of material well-being, and that's what keeps him down. It keeps him down, keeps him quiet, keeps him ignorant, the whole 100 yards. So, the other thing I found interesting that you mentioned when you talked about Heisenberg's, well, I translated indeterminacy relation, but you're talking about the uncertainty principle. Well, that's, you're right. You have to be careful about how you apply it, because anything outside of science it's metaphorical. Yes. It becomes art, and you are a true artist. Your film is brilliant. But the notion that I was kibitzing before there was the internet. I was writing letters back and forth with a former Washington Post editorial writer, and he was telling me that I was wrong, that journalism its point was to be objective, and that the Washington Post was always objective. And I wrote back to him and I said, look, even physics isn't objective anymore.
Absolutely.
Even science itself is not
absolutely
objective.
Absolutely. That they don't understand that.
No, he didn't know what I was talking about.
Yeah.
And so, but I'll cut it off here. But I just want to say, tell all your friends there, I'm here in Washington, D.C., that if they think that Washington holds out any hope for anyone single individual on this planet, or Wall Street, they're wrong. They are wrong. They are childish in that regard.
Yes. Well, I hope this is being recorded, because I mean it. I want to play this, what you just said, to my liberal friends, because they don't, especially now, because now everything's black and white, and they unfortunately, that group, which I know inside out very well, they idealize the West. They would say, all this thing about, the Soviet Union had, empty shells. Look at the America, and even now, everything is yes, and exactly, and even now, because okay, well, that's one thing. Even that, of course, has to be seen in the context. But they'd say even now, everything which is sold in Russia is sort of intrinsically, automatically substandard or worse. So that's a kind of that's a belief. It's a belief system. Which is very difficult.
It's not a gas station with nukes, Andrei. Is that what you're telling us?
Yeah, exactly.
The American media,
Exactly. That's what we are.
Also, for every spare rib or chicken wing that an American eats, there's thousands of people suffering all around the world by the U.S. empire. Look at Venezuela, for example. The United States is holding this guy, Alex Saab, because he was going around the world trying to feed Venezuelan children because the United States was starving them. And he's in American prison. You can, by proxy, Julian Assange. But you want to talk? I was taken by the parts in your film about Russian prisons and how bad this Russian prison was. We just had an inmate in a prison in Fulton County, Georgia, black man, of course, and mentally ill, who was eaten alive by bed bugs while he was in prison. That's what kind of country these people, these idiots, apparently, I'm sorry, these idiots believe is the best place on earth. That's shocking.
Andrei, it's really great to hear, in your own words, kind of how, your transformation from, true believing liberal intelligentsia to an awakening, to having a bigger understanding. I want to hear more from you. I know Regis always has some good thoughts to share. I want to let Regis get in with anything he has to say, but I do want to get back to you as well, Andrei.
Okay.
All right. Thank you, Billy Bob. Andrei, this is Regis. Yeah. I'm in Yalta now. Been living here now for 3.5 years. Mm-hmm. I came here to find out the truth about Russia, the Russian people. And what I've learned is that everything I was taught in the United States about Russia was a lie. Now, since I've been coming to Russia since the year 2016, I have tried to learn as much as I can about what happened during the 90s. And I documented what I had discovered, and I think I was right, that it was the United States government at the time under George Herbert Walker Bush that sent his Harvard economic boys to Russia in the person of one Jeffrey Sachs and Larry Summers.
Yeah.
And Jeffrey Sachs is known as the person who developed the economic shock therapy theory, which he imposed on Russia. He was there for 3 years during the 90s, and he was the person who, I believe, was more importantly involved in the privatization of Russia than anybody else. Andrei, Jeffrey Sachs has become a hero of the liberal, progressive people in the United States today. But I'd like you to share your thoughts on Jeffrey Sachs. Was he connected with the Broward types? And how significant was he in the rape and pillage of the assets of the Russian people?
Well, I didn't know whether they met, but what I can say, of course, I know who Jeffrey Sachs is, and I think Naomi Klein is one of those who wrote about him. I never met Sachs, unlike Browder, but Browder would certainly, Browder has, Browder, as you might know, is a grandson of Earl Browder, who was the leader of the U.S. Communist Party, one of the longest serving. I think he was the leader during the war. Second World War, so he probably, he knew Stalin or something, but he basically was a very important figure in the communist movement. And I once asked, by the way, I asked Browder once, what would your grandfather think of you going to Russia and essentially looting it? He just shrugged it off. But it was a rare moment of honesty, by the way. This is a little joke for you, but it's true. That's what happened. He did. It was a rare moment of honesty because maybe he didn't expect this question. So his sort of knee-jerk reaction was, "Oh, he certainly wouldn't approve of me." that was his first. No, he certainly wouldn't approve of that. But then he said, "Well, but I'd explained it to him, all this thing about human rights, etc., etc." But that's a little story for you. But Browder has this ambition. That's why there are a lot of people who didn't pay tax or basically ran off with the loot. But he has something. There's some sort of psychological mystery to him in him for me, because he does, or maybe he's just a narcissist. He likes speechifying. He has this sort of theory part to him. He likes to sit around and explain that yes, we were making money, but we're also doing good. That's quote, making money and do good at the same time. And the Russians didn't know anything about capitalism and democracy, which for him is one and the same, of course. And he'd go on and rant about that. So he has this sort of. I'm sure he wouldn't pull any punches when he would kind of given a chance and be a Jeffrey Sachs and be a kind of to be asked to provide a theory for what he was doing. So in that sense, of course, he is one can say an extreme neoliberal. Who believes in that kind of capitalism. He didn't question it at all, because because making this film and making also the projects I'm working on now, I did meet some of his colleagues, and they were more, capitalists themselves. They were more sort of qualified and saying, look, of course it was a tragedy for the Russian people. Of course, we saw obviously educated middle-aged people who had to sort of beg. And they were not sort of dopers. They were not beggars. They were not bums. Well-educated women, with high education, having to collect bottles to survive.
Yeah.
And it was a tragedy for the majority of the Russian people. So there were Americans and foreigners who understood that and told me that. But in Browder, and I knew him fairly well, I never ever spotted sort of that a thought or an emotion or anything of that kind. No regrets, no sympathy, no empathy for the suffering of the people in those days. And those, you mentioned the 90s. That in the Russian and 90s, the 90s it's associated for the most Russians associated with we just, as I mentioned, people having lost everything, educated people having lost their role in society, but also young people who had nothing better to do than take drugs, in their millions. So
loss of life, the largest.
The suicides. We have this whole lost sort of generation of people, and we're still facing those circumstances. You talk to any average Russian, he'd have just like about a war. The Second World War, the Great Patriotic War. Well, that generation is almost gone completely now. But it's the equivalent in many ways. It's an equivalent. The 90s, this privatization, the 90s, is an equivalent of this national calamity, which the Second World War was. So, and almost every family has a story. It's a tragic story to tell. So that's the kind of thing that it was. And for the liberals, for this absolute minority, it was the best time. They said, okay, this, they had, the privileged ones. Of course, it was a free for all, and for some foreigners who went there. So, what can I say?
How has your opinion of President Putin changed? Like, he's been in power for a while now. I mean, more than almost 2.5 decades. You know, it kind of seems to me that, you know, he ran on a platform of getting the oligarchs under control, normalizing the economy, stabilizing the economy by nationalizing the oil and gas sector. That seems to be what he has done and what he has done successfully. And the quality of life, the living standards for Russian people have gone up tremendously over the past, you know, 2.5 decades of Putin's leadership. And I think that's why he's very, very popular. But I mean, can't even liberals appreciate that about Putin for what he has done for the Russian people? And I mean, and where do you stand now on the question of Putin? You know, I mean, do you see him as a bad person still, or do you have some good things to say, maybe?
Well, look. It's a good question. You know, there's a few questions, but let's start very, very quickly. Try to be as concise as possible. Well, first of all, the liberals, they don't see that difference. They don't see one obvious thing, is that, you know, if you live in Russia, and, you know, it's normal. You know, we can't always take take the best or the most educated, the privileged, those born into money. Even in Russia, there's now that sort of class for sort of your standard to measure a nation or a situation or historical period. You know, to peg them on the privileged, and that's what, by the way, and the media sometimes the Western media sometimes not quite consciously, or sometimes consciously does. You know, when sort of a Russian take on this or that, you know, it's a liberal, a member of liberal intelligentsia, which are almost always are also privileged in the material terms. It's them who are asked, invited to talk, invited to criticize Russia, or to, you know, admittedly, objectively judging Russia and Putin. So those people don't see the obvious facts. And if you're an average person who lives there, it's absolutely obvious that your standard of living, your life, improved since Putin came to power. Because who they have to compare Putin with? Yeltsin, you know, the disaster of the 90s. You know, they don't have the prime minister of Norway, and you know, people criticize them here too, or sort of the best leader you can find, and no political leader is an angel, I might say. But take the best, the most transparent country, some smaller country, luckier country with a very high GDP like Norway or Switzerland or Luxembourg, whatever, and do people compare? Must people compare them? You know, with the Russians compare them with those countries? It's rubbish. Russians compare Putin with Yeltsin. You know, they compare what this is what. So. You know, absolutely. You know, they compare. You know, take Litvinenko. Okay, Litvinenko was very anti-Putin, but the stories he told me about the police, not just average Russians, the police, you know, at work, who were, you know, paid salaries, admittedly, you know, they have no petrol to drive their cars. They would chase a criminal. A real criminal, you know, not political criminal who, you know, some murderer who, whatever, and so they wouldn't have enough. Their cars were too slow. They'd see a sort of a nightclub that criminal would sort of walk in, and the bouncer at a nightclub door would throw police out, away, so go away, you know, because money was king, money was everything. Even you know what I mean? The state, it was a failed state under Yeltsin. Yeah. So who the hell would average Russian who lives there, who depends on the life there, who doesn't have a grant from the West, from a liberal think tank, to live on? Who should they compare their life with? The 90s? Of course, they choose Putin, because they don't want a Yeltsin number two, show up and bring it all back on them. So that's one. Having said that, now that I was trying to be objective. Having said that, me, Andrei, personally, I'm still a critic of Putin, but for a very specific reason. I think, and I mentioned Marxism, I'm far too left wing. This is maybe a paradoxical take for you, but Putin is an economic liberal. It may not be his fault, by the way, because most people who went, he comes from a poor family. He's a real. His father was a worker, and his mother was a cleaning lady or something like that. I'm not his biography, I'm not a specialist, but he's a real Russian from the real sort of proletariat, sort of Soviet background. Again, when people say, well, Putin is this, Putin is that, you have to understand where he's coming from. And with that, he also had his aspirations, hopes. He learned German. He was very pro-Western in a way. He was the deputy of Sobchak, who was an absolute liberal star, of the 90s. So you must understand this context. So my criticism is, for Putin, is that he's too economic liberal. But I try to be objective. I try to criticize the government as people, people of right and should be able to criticize their government as the Western people criticize their governments. I don't say that the Russian state should cease to exist, as some liberals say. The Russian state should be completely sort of undergo a change and become a vassal of the West, etc. We talked about that, but so. And in a way, of course, but this is an extremely paradoxical subject because if and I don't know, Regis is now in Russia, in as they call Russia occupied Crimea, but maybe even Regis knows more about it. But okay, well, I might know a few things. I made a film. One of my films, a series actually, was made in 2015, was on Russia at that point. And I interviewed people, refugees who came from Ukraine, from eastern Ukraine to Russia. And they were not brainwashed. Another thesis of the West and Russian liberals is that whoever sort of dares to look at things objectively, they're just brainwashed by Russian propaganda. No, of course there's propaganda in Russia, like anywhere else. But in the internet age, internet is still largely free if you use VPN. Russians use VPN much better, much more than average Western person. So I'd say an average Russian has a lot of information and can decide for themselves. It's my view. Some may disagree. Of course, there's a lot of propaganda on TV. I grant that, but a lot of people are completely impervious to that, by the way. But anyway, let's go back to that moment. My documentary. So I interview people, refugees from eastern Ukraine, and I had a Western producer, and it was a Western company I was working for. And my producers have looked on because it was an honest account. So those people were telling me of their life. It was 15 maybe end, so they were quite some time after the Maidan, and they were telling me how the Ukrainian army shelled them. They were also critical of their authorities there, authorities who were then pro-Russian. they were kind of trying to be objective. Some things became better. Some of their leaders were corrupt. They did say this on camera, but they also said that on balance, of course, people did not, and the majority did not support the Maidan, the Ukrainian, for some it's revolution. For them, it was a coup d'état. They certainly did. There were Russian speakers, as most people there are. They were absolutely afraid of losing their identity. They were afraid of not being able to put their kids through a Russian language school, which is not a language it occupies. It's their mother tongue, for God's sake, mother tongue. And were deprived of that on the level of the central government. And so I want anybody who tells them that, and of course there's people in Ukraine, some of them I know too, and some of them were sincere. I think it's a mistake. They were sincere, saying that those people in Donbass, they're somehow they're not quite, they're a little bit retarded. In Ukraine, it's not politically incorrect to say that people in Donbass are slightly retarded. They have all kinds of explanations for that. The people, they sent criminal. I don't even want to quote. I'm not even a specialist in those explanations, but I heard that in Kiev. That people, they used to send criminals there, or they're all from sort of they're minors, and it sort of damages your brain, or they're all Soviets, or they're all commies, or whatever. So this sort of attitude, what do you expect from those people? Do you expect them to surrender and submit and say, okay, take my language away? This is not to say that. But by the way, okay, just the point was that some of those men who I interviewed people who left. I interviewed them outside of Donbass, but they left. They went. They were dying to go to Russia where there was more stability. But some of those men who were behind. And then later I interviewed them as well, and some Russians. But it's absolutely true, by the way, that Russian volunteers, not just Ukrainian, from Russian Federation, that also did go there. But I was told that the majority of those fighters, of those anti-Kiev fighters, were still local, were still from Donbass. Yes, there were the Russians, but the majority were locals. Okay, well, that's what I heard. Why should I not believe it? I heard it from the locals. So
the UN agreed with you at the time, 2015-16.
But they were just, the point is that some of them blamed Putin. Well, you can call it politely. There were apropos critics of, so many critics of Putin, so many kinds. So there were also critics of Putin saying that the Putin is not helping them enough, because had Putin helped them enough, there would have been they would have prevented this coup, or not the coup itself, but the consequences. They would have defended Mariupol, by the way. They were also saying that the majority in Mariupol at the time, nota bene, at the time, were pro-Russian, so they and the Kiev sent troops or paramilitary or whatever to suppress those pro-Russian demonstrations. So and Putin and the criticism of Putin was that Putin wasn't helping them enough. So I'm not from Donbass, I'm not from Mariupol, so that wasn't my criticism, but that's what I clearly heard making a documentary for a Western company. I've never worked for Russian state TV or Russian propaganda. I'm just telling you what I heard. So maybe Putin can be criticized for the way he handled this whole situation. I don't know. I have to, and I'm honest with you. I'm not. I'm obviously I'm a relatively informed person, but since Magnitsky, I prefer to study the case. I prefer to check this. I prefer to, and I'm not making a film on Putin, and I'm not investigating that case. But I'm just laying out all the positions and even the reasons to criticize Putin. Maybe it could have been handled better, but But again, in the dialectics, you can't say this without saying, and that's where propaganda comes from, because you only say this cut because there's always time limit. That's time limit. The time limit is in a way a mechanism for propaganda. So thankfully, you're letting me finish, and to finish, I must saying that criticizing Putin for some things, for the way this eastern situation was, Eastern Ukraine situation was handled, you also have to criticize the West. The loss of life and the war is the ultimate, in a way, ultimate evil, and it has to be avoided. Did the West do enough? And the West is, you can't say, oh, this is not a Western territory. No, the West was heavily involved, heavily involved, even in the Maidan. Of course.
Even since the Orange Revolution.
And they were trying to manage the processes. They were, by the way, they were also involved in the deal with Yanukovych, which was broken. And then they call, democratically elected president. If you believe in democracy, he was democratically elected, and then he was, what happened. But there was also a deal with the Western sort of participation, which mapped out an opportunity for elections later, and then it was thrown out, and Yanukovych had to leave. He would have become Gaddafi probably if he hadn't.
I wanted to say something, but Carlo is literally exploding to speak.
Okay, and just one little point. Okay. So we have the Minsk agreements. We have the Minsk agreements, who is now clear. It's now clear that the Zelensky didn't want to follow up on them. Merkel said, and others said, basically that there were some sort of front for them waiting, for the West waiting for this situation to be resolved. This is a polite way of saying for escalation. We now know from the ex-chancellor of Germany, Schröder, who said that he was participating in he was involved or aware of, I'm not sure, of negotiations. Yeah. Which Americans essentially blocked. So if the loss of life is the ultimate evil, and of course there's some exceptions to that, because the Great Patriotic War, people had to stand up to fascism, to the Nazis, and they had to lose lives. This is an exception. But if in this situation we're not contemporaries of World War II. We're contemporaries of this situation, and before our eyes, ordinary people were betrayed. People in Ukraine and people in Russia, but and with all the criticism of Putin, the West is certainly to blame.
Well, and you have to understand that the United States went in with the Maidan coup, supported by Ukrainian Nazis, Banderites, by design. And part of the design was to destabilize the region and ultimately to break up Russia. That was part of the formula. That's how heinous these people think. They're not above doing anything that will get. They don't care about human life. They don't. The U.S. Oligarchy, let's call them that, political and economic oligarchy. They will kill millions of people to maintain their economic and political hegemony. That's their mantra. And the other thing is, yes, you're right. Putin is being criticized from both sides. But for example, the second strongest party in Russia, the Communist Party, was critical of him because he wasn't going in hard enough. And look what's occurred. I mean, are they wrong? No, they're not wrong. If they had gone into the Donbass in 2014, we wouldn't have had this coup, or at least it probably would not have been affected. It may have avoided the whole thing, but to believe the United States has good intentions anywhere about anything from its political and economic class is you have to be 3 years old to believe that. If you're beyond 3 years old, you figured it out.
Andrei, You've been very, very generous with your time with us.
Thank you.
It's been over an hour. We really appreciate, you talking with us. You've been very diplomatic. I think you've managed to walk the tightrope and not upset or anger your liberal friends. And you've said some things that we agree with. Definitely. I would agree with Carlo that, human rights isn't really a concern of the Western ruling class. What they really care about is cynically exploiting human rights in order to further their political objectives. And their political objectives are hegemony and, making sure that they maintain their, disproportionate share of wealth, power, and privilege that they currently enjoy. But it's declining, and this is making them lash out with these proxy conflicts that we're seeing. But I'm not sure. We could probably let you go. I mean, unless you have, you really want to.
No. Thank you. Well, let's try and meet again. When I have more stories to tell about my current work, but thank you. I think it was.
Before you go, Andrei, just one last thought from me. One of the things you mentioned, I think you responded to Regis. I think we lost him. I don't know. But when you responded to Regis, you said when these American capitalists and the Russian liberals, when they thought about Russia in the 90s, to them, there was no difference between democracy and capitalism. That really struck me. It's perfect, because that is exactly a tweet. I think it was on Saturday, a couple of days ago, from Ursula von der Leyen, the head of the EU Commission, the Wicked Witch of the EU. She tweeted this: "We stand side by side with Ukraine. We stand by Israel. And we stand with Svetlana Tikhanovskaya and the Belarusian opposition." I'm wondering if you had any thoughts about that little tweet, because that to me, that was exactly what you said.
Well, yes, unfortunately, that particular person is not known for, I like using this word dialectics, but it's probably far off. In her case, it's not even just clear thinking. I mean, I'm sorry, Madame von der Leyen, but I'm very critical of the way you handle. And she had, she's prone to gaffes. And when people, I know Germany a little bit, and she was extremely unpopular in Germany. This also shows how these bureaucrats. These top bureaucrats, how their careers evolve, and basically who rules us, or Western Europe, which is part of this, as you say, American empire. I mean, they are very often they're just mediocrities who know.
Agree 100%.
And unfortunately for me, she's an example of that. So, but of course she also reflects this the ideology, and we won't go to the Israel thing, but this kind of this automatic sort of axiomatic nature of politics today, and I suppose politics have always been like this. But what I can say is that is what wasn't always the same is the situation in the arts. And I'm not saying, like some people do, like everything was better, it used to be better before. But there's just one specific thing it has to be said, because I'm a filmmaker. I'm not. I'm interested in politics, but it's not my job. Right? And I do work in the West, as I said very clearly. I don't, even if I work in Russia, I did. For example, I directed a play there, but it's very unusual for me. I work in the West, and if I go to Russia, I work for a Western company, for a Western network, or so. But so I can. But I know the Russian art scene, intellectual scene, of course. So what we, and I even view the Soviet Union differently now, on sort of given the experience and analysis and everything. But at the time I was eager to leave the Soviet Union to study in the West, because not there were people who were just wanted to get rich or wear Western clothes. Of course, I wasn't one of them. I wanted to study because I didn't feel there was enough debate in the Soviet Union. Every regime, every country praises itself. The Soviet Union praised itself, and partly it had a reason, because there was more equality. Some things really. They tried. It failed, yes, but they did try. But what was lacking is a debate. What was lacking is the patience and ability to listen to an opponent, and that was I craved for that also in the arts. So when I came to the West, as I said, I came almost a bit too late, because it was the end of that era when a German director, Fassbinder, could make a film about a Rote Armee Fraktion, about known as Baader Meinhof in America, and be kind of course not defending them, but trying to understand this tragic dialectic of post-war Germany, when a lot of Nazis remained in power and were, by the way, sponsored by the US, and all these processes, and you ask, sort of choosing between communism and Nazism, essentially preferred the latter. And it's very crude. Of course, it's much more nuanced, but we're running out of time. But what I'm saying, all these dialectics were still allowed to be, to be debated. In France, Godard and others, the left-wing views were still part of the intellectual. Not just, of course, we can now go on and talk, but there was a part of mainstream. Films were financed, films were released, people would go and watch them, and so were the books and philosophy, etc. So, unfortunately, and it's not because everything was better when I was young, but it's, okay, anybody can argue with me on this. I'm prepared to listen, but it's gone. There's there's ideology now in the West. There always been, but there was some, there was, as I mentioned, there were also alternatives. Now it's people without noticing it. And me, well, I'm kind of sharing. I'm like a witness, because I grew up in the Soviet Union, and now the West, the Western culture, let's say, reminds me of the Soviet Union. It's not the Soviet ideology, but people go, listen to a Radio 4 program. I know Britain better than I know the. Maybe it's an equivalent of NPR or PBS, whatever, in the States. But you go on and you toe the line. You toe the ideological line. It's now different. It's climate change, and I'm not absolutely. I'm also worried, and everybody. But this is there's a very clear formulaic sort of line, which has to be towed, and which is killing the arts. Look at what's it's entertainment, and when it's political, it's pseudo political, and that's what worries me as a professional.
Well, I'm in the arts also, and I've been a poet all of my life, adult life, and I'm currently working on a series of for the last 12 years, various series of dramatic monologues involving historical figures or anonymous figures around them. The protagonists of the monologues, carry the speech. And I experienced when I came out in favor of Russia defending the Donbass, my publisher wouldn't even speak to me.
Yeah,
wouldn't write. Now I do agree. I mean, back when I was a young man, we were reading everything. We were reading William Burroughs and Amir Baraka, and all of this, all this stuff. The 1968 Sorbonne, all those figures, Foucault, Derrida, all of them, and we were talking about them. But what happens in the United States at least in the, I can speak more articulately about the poetry world, was the bourgeoisie got a hold of the gates. They got a hold of the doorways, and I was not included in as one who could enter the inner sanctums of who was acceptable and who was not. And if you look at, say, for example, what I really know about American poetry for the last 40 years or so, it's all very, very bourgeois. Even when it's attempting to be radical, it's bourgeois, and there seems to be no way around it, and there seems to be no way to gain entry into that world. So I disagree with you a little bit, because I don't think a lot of the discussion that was going on, even in the 60s, had ultimately had much merit as far as progressing. And I think Billy Bob and Ben would agree with me, because they're
In the
much more
US.
practical.
I'm sorry to interrupt. I agree. It was just in comparison. Of course, I was young and hungry, and I saw, wow. I mean, there was. I agree. In the end, no, but there was much more than.
No, I agree. My wife and I, we bought a Bell and Howell 16 millimeter projector, and one of the libraries close to us had a tremendous film archive that my wife was very enthusiastic about. So we watched Godard, and we watched the early Fellini, and we watched the names escape me, but everyone, Herzog and anyway, we watched hundreds of films, and it was exciting and exhilarating. But as far as going out into the general culture and proselytizing about that, when I had dinner with my in-laws, I was not allowed to talk about any of that.
No, that's true. No, I understand. Of course, there was a lot of reactionary stuff as well, and in the end, we can say it failed. Those attempts to break through what you call the bourgeois sort of surface, it failed, and as a result, we had the 90s. The interestingly, of course, the collapse of communism, we call the socialism in Eastern Europe. It coincided with radicalization of capitalism in the West. It kind of it coincided with the with end to regulation, with this neoliberal thing. So it was a global. It wasn't just our local Eastern European story. It was a global, act of history, and of course, partly it was also failure of those attempts by the artists, but maybe because they were still bourgeois. I don't know. But this is a different story. Maybe for the next conversation.
I was going to say, I'm not into arts, I'm into politics. You have a lot of interesting thoughts, and we're here for the unfiltered views that you have as an artist. But maybe next time. I have so many questions, very interesting topics to delve into. So maybe I'll pass it off to Bilbo, but thank you very much for appearing today. It was amazing.
Yeah, Andrei,
thank you very much.
Thank you. You managed to deal with us, and I don't think you're gonna, hurt your reputation too much. You were very diplomatic, so I appreciate you joining us and giving it, sharing your thoughts.
Thank you. Okay, that was great. It was very, very interesting. I enjoyed it. Thank you.
Oh, thanks.
Thank you.
Next time, Andrei. Thanks again.
Talk to you soon.
Keep
Andrei.
in touch. Keep in touch.
All right.
Okay. Bye.
So, Regis. I think Regis had an hour, and then he had to drop out after an hour. But so that's interesting. I was not certain, where Mr. I forget his last name. His last name is where Andrei,
Nekrasov.
where he was at now. I watched I rewatched that excellent documentary on the Magnitsky Act, which everybody really ought to check out. And and you can see, he did a great job of documenting his own political transition, at least with respect to that one particular situation. And so I wasn't sure if, you know, how big of a change in his views that resulted in. But, you know, it was interesting discovering that during, you know, his, you know, everything he was sharing today. But I think he was being diplomatic. I think, you know, he's got to be careful because he does work in Western Europe, and he's a filmmaker, and he rubs elbows with all these people that we are constantly talking bad about and hating on. So God bless him for coming on and for, you know, talking with us nevertheless. And I don't think he hurt his reputation or his credibility with those people, which I guess, you know, in retrospect, that's something that he's obviously probably concerned with just for his own livelihood, etc. But
a careful man, but as he said, he has his own life path. An artist, a Western Russian expat, and I really appreciate his unfiltered views as they were. I didn't feel the need to, you know, debate anything. No, sir.
No, but the, you know, I mean, I keep going back to myself because I really wanted to talk about the art, because that film was very artistic. It was brilliant in that sense. I mean, he brought the flavor of an artist to this documentary, which you don't get that much. And I look at my position. I've been a poet. That's my main activity for all of my adult life. Yet I went out and I sought another way of earning a living so that I wouldn't have to be beholden to any of these assholes. That I wouldn't have to make a living by teaching at a university, you know, a bunch of snotty kids teaching an MFA program so they can write about their belly buttons or any of that shit that goes on in these places, you know, or publish, you know, become part of a publishing journal where the editor-in-chief is telling me, no, you can't put that in, or no, you can't publish that. Any of that. I kept my own independence, period. I paid a big price for it, huge price. Granted, I didn't start making noise until these people in Connecticut picked me up. This new beat thing that they think they got going on. I'm not even close to a beat poet, but there's one guy that liked me at just the narrowest of margins. I got into that. I wouldn't have that. I wouldn't have people seeking out like they're going to publish another one of my books. And I've patched up things with one of my old publishers, and he wants to see my new manuscript, you know. So that sort of thing. But I had to wait till I was 70 years old and all, you know, nearly dead before I even got a little bit of a break. And I did it by overwhelming people with the talent I brought to what I did, because I pursued it constantly for 55 years and didn't drop a stitch. So there are other ways of going, is what I'm saying. I don't like the notion of compromising to go, you know, to go, what is it? Something to get by, you know.
Yeah.
I don't like that in an artist. I think he brought up Dostoevsky. Dostoevsky never did that. Dostoevsky never compromised about one word that he wrote, and he was just so great he overwhelmed people. Now we have in America, we have all of these people that basically never got a shot, that really just died on the vine, and especially in the world I operate in, that it's, you know, people they write poetry because it's easier than picking up a violin. So every asshole out there thinks he's a poet, and I encounter people every day, literally every day, who don't know anything about poetry, who write it and want to insist that they want to be part of that world. And I have a great objection to that. And that also keeps me out. There's the school of thought that everybody should be allowed to express themselves. What could be more patently bourgeois than that horse shit? Oh yeah? Tell that to an architect or an engineer who builds bridges. Anybody can build a bridge. No, they can't. You know, come on. And it's
we all felt it, Carlo. You certainly found a debate partner, and you were both really enjoying the exchange. So hopefully next time you get to continue.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm going on with you guys, and you don't want to hear. You're not.
No, that's not true.
But anyway, that's my perspective on things. But
yeah, I would recommend everybody checking out Carlo's work. It's called Putin Ain't Such a Bad Guy. It's a draft colloquy on the CIA by Carlo Parcelli. You can Google it on the internet. It's one of his greatest works, in my opinion, because I'm more political than artistic.
Yeah, that was not. I don't consider that a work of art, but it's the only thing I ever put up that went viral. And I have to thank my good friend who's now passed away, Bill Blum, for the core information there. You should, and anybody out there should buy his 2 books dealing with U.S. hegemony around the world, Rogue Nation and I can't remember the second one. But anyway, he has 2 great books about it.
Yeah.
Great primers.
Killing Hope.
Right, exactly.
American military and CIA interventions since like 1946. Okay, let's wrap it up. Thank you, everybody. We'll be back on Friday for episode 28. Look forward to it. Thank you very much. Bye.
Bye.